Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Russ Ganem, and I am Associate Provost and Dean of International Programs at the University of Iowa. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Commitment to Internationalization lecture series, funded by the Stanley University of Iowa Support Organization. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, the 10th in our series, Professor Adrian Wing, from the University of Iowa College of Law. Adrian Wing is the Associate Dean for International and Comparative Law Programs and the Bessie Dutton Murray Professor at the University of Iowa College of Law, where she has taught since 1987. Additionally, she serves as the director of the University of Iowa Center for Human Rights, as well as the director of the France Study Abroad program in Arcachon. She currently teaches in the fields of sex discrimination, race discrimination, and law in the Muslim world. Her honors include the Michael J. Brody Award for Faculty Excellence in Service from the University of Iowa and the Regents Award for Faculty Excellence. She is the author of more than 150 publications, including being the editor of Critical Race Feminism, a reader and Global Critical Race Feminism and International Reader, as well as co-editor of Family Law and Gender in the Middle East and North Africa. Her international scholarship has emphasized two regions, Africa, especially South Africa, and the Middle East. Dean Wing has advised the founding mothers and fathers of three constitutions, South Africa, Palestine, and Rwanda. Further, Dean Wing has held leadership positions in various organizations. She currently serves on the American Journal of International Law Board of Editors, Council of the American Bar Association Section on Legal Education, the Princeton Class of 1978 Executive Committee, International Law Student Association Board of Directors, and Blacks of the American Society of International Law Task Force. After receiving her Bachelor of Arts degree from Princeton with high honors in 1978, Dean Wing earned her Master of Arts degree in African Studies from UCLA in 1979. She obtained her Doctorate of Jurisprudence in 1982 from Stanford Law School. And prior to joining the College of Law faculty here at Iowa in 1987, Dean Wing practiced 5 years in New York City with two international firms. And on a personal note, let me state what a privilege it has been to work with Dean Wing over the years. She has taken the lead on a number of projects in Kosovo, France, Kenya, South Africa, China, Ireland, just to name a few, in addition to the ones that were mentioned in her bio. Dean Wing and I have had the pleasure of traveling together to South Africa in 2018, where she gave a keynote lecture at Ewha Women's University, one of our major partners in that country. Similarly, Dean Wing serves on International Programs Faculty Advisory Council, where her advice and wisdom have been invaluable. Similarly, International Programs has collaborated with the UI Center for Human Rights on multiple occasions. Last but not least, she and her husband James are huge Star Trek fans, as are my wife and I. And under Dean Wing's leadership, international education at our university has, to quote Spock, been allowed to live long and prosper. And with that, we are all eager for her talk today, which is entitled Demarginalizing Race, Class, and Gender in International Education in the Post-COVID World. So I welcome Dean Adrian Wing.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Good. I'm so happy you found time to come out. The weather's kind of odd at the moment, but at least we are getting some beautiful colors this fall. I'd like to thank International Programs and its fearless leader, Dean Ruskanim, for inviting me to do this commitment to internationalization lecture. And I usually do several lectures a year at the university. And so I was kind of surprised to get asked to do one this fall. I hadn't done one since last year. And so I picked this topic because from the bio that he gave you, you can see my life, my credentials, my boards, etc., that I belong to intersect with this kind of topic. I have to apologize in advance because last month I was in Kenya and I picked up some kind of a bug, and part of whatever I picked up has made my voice hoarse now for almost 2 months. And so I'm having all kinds of tests and different things done. So holding this, you should be able to hear me no matter what. We don't want to discourage anybody from going abroad just because, well, whatever I got, I probably got there. Although people say could be 8-hour flight to Frankfurt plus 9-hour flight to Nairobi. So the tin can the two of them I was flying in might be related to whatever I might have picked up. The lecture is going to focus on the post-COVID world, in part because there may be or have been a different reality with study abroad before COVID than there is now. I think we're too close, though, to COVID to make any definitive assessment. Many countries, including the United States, and I'm sure Kenya as well, are not really recording the cases that they were doing before. And some of the countries may not have been doing it very well, even when we were in the heart of the pandemic. So it's kind of unclear to know what's happening. We do have statistics from before COVID in terms of study abroad, but then everything collapsed and the whole world, middle of 2020, stopped all of the international programs and all of the study abroad opportunities. And we stopped a couple of years almost. And it was not only students that were stopped, but also faculty and staff. And we may not know for some more years the long-term effect as to how people view something like study abroad. And it also happened to coincide with the collapse of the Chinese students that had been coming to America for a long time. I believe, didn't we at one time have thousands of them? And now it's a handful, a literal handful. So some study abroad, for us, we think of going out somewhere. But for the Chinese, it was study abroad for them coming to the United States. And that's not available to them as it used to be, to our detriment. And so I thought, I'm not even sure we're in a post-COVID world, but if we're looking at it as, okay, it's at least a post-COVID world in that we're not taking the existence of COVID on the serious level where people were wearing the masks and all that. A few people are wearing them, but generally no, people are not taking boosters. I couldn't even keep straight what booster am I supposed to have. So we'll presume that we're in some kind of post-COVID world, but I think the experience, and I'd like to know from the students that are here, you all obviously, some of you may have been in university then, or you may have been in high school when COVID hit. If the fact that we had a pandemic like that may affect all of us for the rest of our lifetimes, especially people who are just now in a university, in terms of how they may look at the world and where they want to go, or what they want to do, or where their parents may be willing for them to go, or to fund them or help them where to go. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about my experience, and then I will make some conclusions based on my experience about where I think we need to go. And we need to boldly go where no one has gone before. Yes, my partner James and I are not only Trekkies, we also do Star Wars. We do that too. And as an international lawyer, science fiction is international law. Except the aliens, instead of on this planet, they're from other planets, but all of the points that are being made are points about what's happening on the earth, or what may happen on the earth. So I think it's actually relevant. So my personal story, I was born in California, but I grew up mainly in Orange, New Jersey, which is near New York City. And people tell me that I don't have an Iowa accent. I've been here 37 years. I don't have an Iowa accent. I'm East Coast still. So anyway, I grew up in Orange, New Jersey. My father died quite tragically when I was 9. My mother, who had been a housewife, started to be a teacher again, something she'd done before I was born. And the public schools in Orange, New Jersey were very poor. So she used all of her resources, including Social Security benefits from the death of my father, to send the 3 of us to private school. So I ended up going from a mainly Black public school at that point to a lily white all-girls school that was called the Mary Baird School for Girls. It was like a movie. And these young women, when they would graduate, the idea would be they would go to what were then called the Seven Sisters, these female schools, which still exist, like Vassar and Wellesley, but also then Radcliffe and other schools. And then they would get married to rich men who went to the Ivy League. Needless to say, that wasn't the world that I was from. So in 7th grade, I started French, which I'd had a little exposure to as when I was 5. I discovered in French class, I was the only girl who had not been to France in the 7th grade. This is what I mean, prep school, resources. And I went home crying and said, I haven't been. And the other girls talk about what it was like to go and see the Eiffel Tower and other places. So my mother said, don't worry. One day you'll go. That didn't help me as a 12-year-old. So I would memorize whatever was in the textbook, the little maps, so I could pretend as if I had been. Oh, well, the Eiffel Tower. And then we went over to the Louvre, and then we did this and that, when I only knew from the piece of paper. So anyway, in high school, many people go on junior trips at spring break. By at 10th grade, I switched from this all-girls school. It merged with another school. I ended up at another school. So I became one of the first 49 girls at a 200-year-old boys' school. So that was the opposite of the experience I'd had. But the boys' school, they didn't know how to deal with girls, so they treated us like boys. We just you're in it. And so I was always an A student, and to be accepted, I would help the students, who were mainly boys, with their French and their physics and their calculus and their AP history, with all of the subjects that they had. Once again, French class. I'm the only one who hasn't been to France. And a lot of these, mainly young men, they'd been there, but it meant nothing to them. Oh yeah, we were in Jamaica at spring break. Yeah, we were in London, but I hated blah, blah, blah. It meant nothing to them because they could take it for granted. I cried with my mother again. I want to go. No resources. We're really lucky that we could be in a private school with these wealthy people. So then I went to Princeton, where I was in the 4th class of women. Oh, that seems unbelievable now. But it was just like Newark Academy, that mainly boys' school I went to. So I knew how to deal with the people. They were the same people. So I had placed out of French. I didn't have to take it. But I still wanted to go abroad. And I learned they had study abroad. And the amount, and forget it. I was working 20 hours a week on campus in the cafeteria and the bookstore, and just to survive. Plus I was, having a lot of financial aid and loans. So the idea of getting any money to be able to leave the country was just a total fantasy. And my friends were mainly other African Americans. Back then, we were called Afro Americans. Don't use that word now. Got to say African Americans. But anyway, none of the Afro Americans were going abroad. So I didn't have to deal with hearing the stories of my classmates who had wealth and who were going off to Switzerland at Christmas break, or all the things they were doing. So then I was going into my senior year, and I heard of a program called Crossroads Africa. The Peace Corps was normed on this program, and my uncle had gone on it in 1963, and this was 1977. So I learned about it, and the principle was that you would fundraise money to go. I'm sure there were people whose father or mother just wrote out the check. There was no Venmo. There was no internet. You had to use a check. But I was going to have to fundraise. And I spent all spring, I believe I raised $3,000 in 1977, which was actually quite a bit of money. 3,000 could be quite a bit of money right now if somebody said to you, you got to raise this. And so I got some from campus groups, and I got some from my grandfather's church. And I said, I'll come back, I'll give you a slideshow. So I raised enough money, not only for the fee, but also I had a summer work obligation. How could I go if I couldn't come up with whatever was the amount? Then if I go, well, I need a backpack. I need certain clothing. I need a camera. They used to have these little kind of paper cameras. I needed like a real camera. And of course, there were no cell phones, so there was no camera in that. So that's how I needed to raise $3,000 to have all those components, or I couldn't go. And I did it. The most painful attempt is I tried to get money from the Third World Center, which was comprised of all the groups of students of color. They gave out money. I made a spiel to them about what I was going to do, come back and do lectures. I sat there a couple hours. They didn't give me a dime. So I was really upset because I felt like here my people didn't give me a dime. And I went to my childhood church, which was mainly white, that I didn't even go to anymore, but my mother still went to it. And I went to them and said, I'll give you a talk. And so they gave me money. So anyway, I got money from some unusual sources and not necessarily from sources I thought. So I went to Kenya, 1977, the Kenya that I just came back from. And it changed my life. How many of you in this room have been abroad to another country? Okay, I don't need to tell any of you all what happens when you go abroad and the world is opened up and you put a lot of the things you were doing get challenged by who you're meeting and what you're seeing. And that all happened to me. And I was living in a little hut in a village. And we had come there to build a clinic for women who were dying in childbirth. We get there and the men who ran the village said, oh, we don't want that. We want you to build a house for a reverend from the United States. And if we can give him a nice house, he'll come and stay. So we were all young people from, 10 of us from 6 or 7 different schools. Our thought was not to build a church for this white guy to come to this village. If they want to do that, fine. But none of us thought that that should be what we were doing. So we left. We left where we were assigned. Our luggage had been laid. Anyway, we ended up in this other village, which is where some other students had been the year before. And so they weren't expecting us, but they were happy to see us. And the year before, they had built on a classroom building 1 layer of cinder blocks. We're like, what the heck is this? 1 layer of cinder blocks for the whole summer? Well, they didn't have any cement. They said, if we have a party and you guys are here, we'll fundraise for the cement. So they had a party, they raised some money, and I went with the leader of the group to the only cement factory in the country, which still exists. I just saw it. Cross country, with this money, we need cement. They said, that'll be fine. We'll send it to you in October. We're a summer program. We're not going to be here in October. So all we ended up doing is 1 more layer of the cinder block. That's all we had. So some people in the group were freaked out by that. They came expecting to contribute, to do certain things, and it didn't happen. To me, it was fantastic. It was like, wow, you don't know what's going to happen when you're abroad. Whatever you thought you were going to do is not necessarily what's going to happen. So one guy left the group and vanished, and we didn't see him again until we ran into him in Paris. Another woman started dating one of the local men, and he got a little bit too grabby on her, so she left. I mean, the group was like breaking apart. So this all might have turned me off from ever traveling again, but it excited me very much. And one of the other exciting parts is our little hut where 6 of us lived didn't have any door. And so we had guests every night. I would call them giant rats. Some people might have called them mice, but they were in the thatch. And sometimes they would drop onto the ground. That wasn't what I wanted. So after a few weeks of tolerating the rats dropping, including getting into our food, we asked the villagers, we have this rat problem and we don't want to bother you. We know things are difficult. They said, why didn't you tell us? Nobody has rats in their house. we had made a presumption that all these people would have rats, and we couldn't ask them about it when they gave us some rat poison, and that was the end of the rats. Another very valuable lesson, one of the most valuable lessons. And on top of being able to have a bucket of water once a week to wash yourself, that was also a good thing about use of water. No clean water to drink other than you boil it. And we all got rashes from the water from the river 6 miles away. That little girls went and got the water for us. And so we all had rashes that didn't smell particularly good. And then we're using this water to cook. We ended up cooking a few creatures in the water. The frog, the proverbial frog who doesn't know how to jump out. Anyway, all of that, I found it fascinating. And I decided I want my career to involve Africa. And at this point in American history, there had been a movement, there had been the Civil Rights Movement, then the Black Power movement, and part of that involved Black people wanting to be connected to Africa. There was this book, Roots, all of this. So I didn't come up with this idea off the top of my head, oh, Africa. But between that and my uncle and the environment I was in, I wanted to add Africa to my career, but I was going to be a senior. I didn't have any time in my schedule to be able to add anything that wasn't already laid out. I was majoring in political science, minoring in Afro-American studies, and getting a teaching credential to teach high school. So anyway, I then went to UCLA, which has a fine program in African studies. You had to do an African language. I did Swahili, which I continued at Stanford. And I also did Portuguese because I decided I wanted to specialize in countries that were then newly independent. Who knows in 1979 what countries in Africa were newly independent that spoke Portuguese? Yes? Yes? That's one. Mozambique. More. Place called Goa. Goa's not in Africa. I've been to Goa, but in Africa, there's a place called Guinea-Bissau and the Cape Verde Islands. Anyway, there are like 5 of these countries, and they were brand new. Had just liberated themselves from the Portuguese regime that had governed them for hundreds of years. So I decided it would be good to specialize in something new. The English-speaking countries had gotten their independence in like the 60s. To me, that seemed very old. So I was specializing in the Portuguese-speaking countries. So anyway, after that, I had deferred from law school. So I went to Stanford and looked into a variety of areas, including international law, and said, okay, I'm going to do international law with Africa. I spent a semester as a student doing an externship. You students can do externships. And I spent it at the United Nations. And that changed my life too. I met many people who later on became diplomats on a large level. I met a guy named Thabo Mbeki. Anybody know who that is? Yes? Yes, he was the second person, Black person, to be the president of South Africa. I met him. He was just a young man in the African National Congress. I met many people who, they were young men hoping their countries would become free. One of them ended up winning the Nobel Prize for Peace from East Timor. He was a young man just hoping his country could break itself free from Indonesia. And he actually came here to Iowa 20-something years later. And I said, I know you won't remember me, but about 20 years ago, you and I had dinner. He was like, Adrian, where have you been for the last 20 years? I've been out here in Iowa while he was getting the Nobel Prize. He becomes president of East Timor. So I'm saying this because you may go somewhere and make some friends who later on will be quite significant people globally. So then after Stanford, I did 5 years in New York, 4 years in a big Wall Street firm that I went to because it did international law with Africa. It also did more work with the Middle East and Europe. So my interest expanded beyond my initial African interest because realistically, commercially speaking, which is where the law is, there were many more opportunities dealing with other parts of the world. So I learned about some places in Europe and also the Middle East. And then I ended up here in Iowa in 1987. Everyone always says, this story, I don't see the Iowa connection. I ended up here in Iowa because of love. Not love of Iowa. I didn't know nothing about Iowa. At that point, I was married to this guy named Rico, not this gentleman here, who I actually dated before Rico. But we had broken up and I met Rico and I ended up marrying Rico, who was a doctor. The US government assigned him to the Tama Indian settlement as their first doctor. And we were living in New York City. And we were going to have to move to Iowa. And we thought it was the end of our world to move from civilization to what we considered the boonies. We were only going to be here 2 years. Rico left after 1 year and was sent up to Point Barrow, Alaska. And I, as you heard, I'm in year 37. So I came because of love of a person. And this is advice to all of you. You don't know where you're going to end up because of love of a person, not necessarily the place that you may have to move because of personal reasons. So when I came here, they said to me, what do you want to teach? And I knew I wanted to teach something with Africa. So I started a course that I'd had at Stanford called Law in Radically Different Cultures. And it included Egypt and Botswana. And then I started human rights, and then I started comparative law. So I did a whole bunch of courses involving international. Now I only am teaching law in the Muslim world in our summer program. And so I've now been the Associate Dean of International Comparative Law Programs since 2015. Seems like a very long time. And we have 2 of our own abroad programs, a Wintram in London that I had headed when it was a semester program for 3 springs. And I've been head of our France study abroad program for over 20 years. And we were shut down 3 years during COVID. So I think I've been to France over 50 times. And I was able to bring my mother to France and many countries. And she would always say, do you remember when you were a little girl and you were crying because you hadn't been to France? And now look at you. You don't know where you're going to end up going or being. And France is my second country after the United States. My 2 biological children took 12 years of French. They both worked at a French corporation. The English word for this, Cap Gemini. And so it became part of their world as well. And none of this would have happened, I think, if I hadn't first had that connection back in Kenya in 1977. So I went to Kenya maybe in year 2000, but this September, I was invited to come back because we have, the University of Iowa Law School, a MOU. Who knows what an MOU is? All these professors do. Is there any student who knows? It's called Memorandum of Understanding. We have hundreds of these agreements at the University of Iowa. So we did an MOU last fall with the Kenyan Judicial Services Commission, that sent 2 delegations of their Supreme Court and other high-level judges to Iowa. So they had come twice, maybe 25 people in total. And they invited me this September to come and address their annual meeting of their judiciary, where I was addressing the Supreme Court and several hundred other judges. And this was so incredibly meaningful to me because I thought of me as that undergrad 20-year-old with a backpack with the rats coming, out of the thatch. And here I was in the 5-star hotel, and I had a protocol person, meaning full-time, this person from the government was taking me and getting me whatever I needed. We had a driver who was a plainclothes police officer who apparently had some kind of weapon. So anywhere we went, we had the protocol and the driver. That's a long way from that young student. And I never could have believed I would be in that position. And I was able to make the beginning of my speech in Swahili, which I had looked up and made sure I would be correct. And they were astonished that I had ever taken Swahili, much less that apparently what I said was presentable. So to me, study abroad was such a critical part of my life that I wanted to extend it to others. So way before I came to Iowa, I was very active in my Princeton class of 1978. You heard I'm on the executive committee now. I used to be the vice president of the whole class as an alum. So we started the Princeton Class of 78 Foundation that gives summer grants to current Princeton undergrads, most of whom go abroad. And we started that, I think, in about 1982. And at first, we just had a few thousand. We'd give a few hundred to students. The report we had most recently, we have $400,000 in that account. So we're able to just give from the interest to different students to study abroad. And some of those students are very privileged people, but some of them aren't. And they could never go abroad if they didn't get some other resources from the university. So I'm very proud that that foundation is continuing over 40 years to help students. Now, I already told you about I ran the London program. I run the France program. I even did a post-program tutorial after the France program where students would come with me to other countries. And I did it for a number of years, and I took them to Strasbourg, Venice, Rome, Germany, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. As you could imagine, given current events, I get students that I took to the Middle East 15 years ago writing to me because they're seeing images or things on TV that remind them of when they went there, when they were a student. Now you may think, okay, this affected me in my career. It affected me personally in that I have 7 children, 2 biological sons I mentioned, and then 5 others that I took in. 2 are from Ethiopia. They were young girls who came to America as refugees. That was in 1999. My daughter, one of my daughters, she's now a medical doctor. We believe she's the first person from her ethnic group, the Oromo of Ethiopia, to become a doctor in the United States. And she is a Muslim who wears a headscarf. And she has had hell throughout her life in America. Dark skin, heavy accent, headscarf. No one believes she could be the doctor. And in this time period, she's working at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. which she says to her in many ways reminds her of the refugee camp she lived in Kenya when she was a girl. And her sister's here in Iowa City with 4 kids. Mako in Chicago has 2 kids. So I have Muslim grandchildren as well. One of my sons married a Jewish woman, so I have a Jewish grandchild as well. I have one of my sons converted to Catholicism when he married a Mexican American. One of my sons is an atheist, and 3 of them are evangelical Lutherans. So we got the rainbow, multinational, multi-religion, or no religion, and that's part of familyhood. Once again, I don't know if I would have had the courage to think I could take in someone from another country, another culture, and raise them after they were abandoned here when they got to Iowa City. Then I also thought about this today. My youngest son, who's now 34, when I needed a nanny when he was born, I ended up hiring a Chinese woman whose husband was getting a PhD. She barely spoke English, and they lived with us 5 years. 5 years. And I said after year 1, I'm sure you all want to have a baby. You've been married a while. So they had a baby while they lived with us, and I paid for Grandma Du to come from Shanghai, who'd never been on a plane, live with us a year. Grandma Du left, and the other 2 grandparents came, lived with us for a year. All of my friends thought I was crazy. They said, you have all these Chinese people in your house. I said, we have, like a multicultural family. And we've stayed in touch with that family all this time. And their son, who was born while they lived in my house, Baby Chow, went to Northwestern and is a corporate businessman. And we've seen them in Shanghai, and we've seen them in San Francisco, where they also live. And that son of mine, Yen, taught him Mandarin. He was only 5 when she left, and he forgot it. But when he was in high school, he was a gymnast from age 7, and his father and I sent him to China to study with an Olympic gold medalist coach. So that child, we said he needs to take Mandarin. So he took 2 summers of Mandarin. And then that son went to West Point, and he took 4 years of Mandarin. And he studied over there. And I just thought we take it for granted in our family, the interaction with the Chinese family. And that's also part of our heritage as well. Once again, I don't know if I would have had the courage to do that. I looked at it as normal. I had no biological relatives in Iowa, and I needed to create a situation that would be more hospitable. So here at the law school, when I turned 60 7 years ago, I decided I wanted to help study abroad, because many of our students in the law school, they don't have the resources. It's summer money. You can't use the academic year money. So I started the Adrienne Wing Study Abroad Fund. And during the pandemic, we couldn't send anybody abroad. So the money built up. So last year I was able to give $20,000 out of that fund for our students to go to London and also to our France program. And I've encouraged my colleagues, and you all are in different departments here, you can start your own fund. You can start whatever cause you want. And actually, some of my colleagues give to the Wing Fund because they don't want to start their own. I gave $100,000. Now you may say, where did she get $100,000? As employees, we get these thing called benefits, which can include insurance. And you can buy supplemental insurance. So I got supplemental insurance of $100,000. to create the Wing Fund. So the law school advertised it and then said, people start coming to my door. How do I get money from the Wing Fund? I said, oh, I have to die. And who knows, I may not die right away. So that's why every year, every month, $500 of my paycheck goes to the Wing Fund. So it built up. But the problem is it's not endowed at the moment. When I do pass, then it will become the 100,000. And so the endowment will spin off interest that students will be able to benefit from long after I'm gone. And I hope more people or some of my family will give to it. I don't think it's going to get to 400,000 like the Princeton Class of 78 Foundation, but I hope it will get to significantly more to help our law students. So any of you can do this. You can do things through your church, through your sororities, through many, many different groups. And so I was happy that at least my sons had exposure to going abroad from a young age rather than waiting till they were 20. I've been to 100 countries. James, my partner, has been to 50, 60, something like that. And these two biological sons have been, I don't know, 20, 30 countries. And then the two Ethiopian daughters, one of them has gone back to Ethiopia and the other hasn't left the country. The three sons have been to several other countries. So it's in their blood. So my sons have learned, you are African Americans. You have an identity, but you're also citizens of the world. So when we go places and they've met heads of state, celebrities, and people in refugee camps, wherever you go, you treat them like a human being, not like you're superior because you're an American, even though relatively the fact that we could be there means we have resources that most people don't. And you need to befriend the people and interact with them, not like they're some lab subjects or your servants. Unfortunately, there's many stories of ugly Americans abroad acting up how they're treating people. Gives us a bad rep. We're also very loud compared to most other people. So they'll know who are the Americans because of our voice. Also, how we wear clothes is different. So I taught my children low key, not loud, not. So anyway, this is all part of my history. So linking all of that into the need for different types of people from the United States to go abroad. We now have several 100,000 people, students still, who are going abroad. I couldn't get the most accurate data, but these students are going anywhere from a week, like spring break, all the way up to a whole year. And things had been growing up until the time of the pandemic. I read a bunch of articles that were very optimistic and said, yes, everything's going to be great. And I'm waiting to see that. Especially given the global situation right now with the wars that are going on in different regions and the most recent developments with Israel and Gaza. Those are not necessarily things that make people or their families think about jumping out of the country. As you can tell, I believe strongly that going abroad will change a person's life, all the way to the fact that I was able to take my mother to 20 countries before she passed away. And she loved that I could take her. Think about that. When you get out of school, you don't want to say, Mommy, Daddy, I need money to do X. You want to say, how can I take you somewhere? Because those family members, some sacrifice was probably done for you to get your education. And we have benefited because several of our children have paid for us to go abroad with them. First class to Machu Picchu wasn't bad. So my colleagues say, how did you do that? Train the kids from their young that you're going to give and help the parents, not the individualistic kind of view that Americans have. In other countries, I take it for granted. You got to help your parents. Whether you're a lawyer or whether you're very poor, you have to help them. So we are in a situation where we don't know what's going to happen with the study abroad, but we know if people do go abroad, most of them will get benefits if their hopes are not too high. If you think you were going in a 5-star hotel and not the hut with the thatch, that could be a problem. And at this stage of my life, I'm not going into the thatch hut, but I'm glad I did it when I was in my 20s. It made me appreciate that I could, at a later stage, have my protocol person come and say, what do I want from the store? I wouldn't have appreciated that if I'd grown up with all of that privilege, perhaps. So there have been studies done by various scientists, theorists, that prove, not just my anecdotal idea, that prove there's a positive association between study abroad and participation in higher academic performance, communication skills, etc. But the statistics show the huge variance where most of the people that are able to go abroad are often people of relative or total privilege compared to many people who could be first generation or who could be from backgrounds even much more underprivileged than I was then, and would never imagine leaving the area where they live, much less going out of the country. And so we, in order to compete globally on many levels, and in order to cooperate globally on many levels, we've got to get a bigger proportion of our students out there. It's not enough just to say, okay, there's numbers out there. Who cares what their class status is? We need to look as institutions, what are we doing that will help so that people who've never thought of going out of the country would be willing to consider going abroad. So what to do? I have a very radical idea. Maybe it won't happen in my lifetime. I think every student at every university should have an abroad experience. Now, some years ago, there were some schools that were trying to up their percentages, and probably, Russ, you would know more than I. There are schools that have more than 50% of their students who, before the pandemic, were going abroad. And I'm not sure the Iowa percentage, if it's 10% or it's something that's not at a high level, which is what you would expect. We are a state university. And so the resources that the university has and many of the students who are going here are not necessarily aimed at adding in something like study abroad. I would like to see even a bigger dream. Not only would you go at university level, but if you went to graduate school or professional school, you would also have an opportunity. Because clearly, if you're in medical school and you go somewhere, it's going to be a very different experience than if you're a junior biology major. So like I say, I don't know if this is going to happen. It would clearly need a total reconfiguration of how we look at what is education, what is important. The first thing that has to be done is the financial aid picture. We need to make it where you could just pick to go and it would not have a negative financial impact on you versus what I had to do to even go to a summer program. This can happen. Once again, I only know certain very privileged experiences. My cousin went to Harvard Law School. First summer, they say, where do you want to go? They had this huge list of countries with different kind of jobs. She ends up filling out, I want to go to New Zealand to handle domestic violence cases. That's pretty specific. They paid her airfare, they paid her housing, they paid her summer stipend, and she just went. And I just thought, wow, wouldn't that be great if students everywhere could say, yes, I'd like to be this specific. Now, at the law school, we have an Equal Justice Foundation that fundraises to help students in the summer do public interest projects. Some might be international, but probably most are domestic. I think I heard we only raised like 10,000. Maybe Brom knows. 15,000. I have a friend teaching at NYU. They have a similar group. They raised 75,000. Once again, privilege. So more of their students can go to these places. So we need somehow to make it possible so that the funding could be added in to the academic year in such a way that if you're already getting this much scholarship, it would cover whatever you were going to do. I have many students, they want to go to the program, but they don't want to or can't borrow more money on top of what they're already borrowing. It would be great if the federal financial aid could be used, the scholarships, for these sorts of things. And the law students, they borrow very large sums of money, relatively speaking. And so adding in 14,000 more the first year summer to go abroad is a lot. We have to also, look at the small things, like the price of a passport costs quite a bit even. And then you got to get the pictures and you got to do this. And so people may not even be able to get the passport. And if you say, oh, it's for 10 years. Yeah, but I need that money right now. So even funding for things like that are part of what we have to look at. Another thing we have to look at regards the family. Now we in America is like, okay, this person's 18. We don't deal with their family. That's not part of it. Yet, those parents or grandparents or other relatives may have quite a bit of influence still on that young person. And there could be family members saying, I don't want you to go abroad. It's too dangerous. Or the opposite. Yes, of course you must. So I do pre-law recruiting for the law school, big forums. I'm going tomorrow to LA, be a couple thousand people at the LA forum. And some of the people come with their parents. When the parent comes up, I say hello to the student. I say hello to the parent. I say, is this your sister? I know it's their mother. But I engage that parent because the fact that the student is there with the parent means this parent's view is important. Maybe the parent's going to pay the whole fee, but maybe the parent's wisdom is there. So I always engage the parents. And then people are like, oh, nobody's talked to me at all. I'm a mother of 7, right? So I'm always going to talk to the parent if they're there. So a lot more work has to be done to think about, okay, how can we have information or videos or Zooms available so that the parents could see, oh, okay, this is doable or not. There's often a lack of awareness in many people about the opportunities. Clearly, if it was mandatory for everybody in 4 years or 5 years, the institution would gear up in a whole different way, starting with freshmen. Okay, you guys are going to be going your junior year in something related to your major. And so we need to do this and that. So that would just be part of what every institution would have to do. Now, all of this requires more money, more staff, short supply for these things. There are people who worried about graduating on a certain schedule. So that would also have to be planned, which I know can be hard not going abroad. Can I graduate in 4 years or 5 years or whatever amount you want? And of course, many families will raise the safety concern, especially in times like this. You can't poo-poo that. That's very serious. So it could be, okay, maybe spring, Thanksgiving, we're going to Dominican Republic. I'm not going to Dubai. So it could be a particular situation is going on where certain places we won't let the students go, or the faculty, or we go by the State Department advisory levels. And so it could be, well, I really had wanted to go to this country, but while I was in school, it wasn't really something I could do. So I went to some other place. Wherever you would go, you can gain a lot from that place. I, from my France program, have said for years, do not wear a shirt that says a U.S. name. No Iowa, no New York, no anything. That's a very American thing to do. You will stand out even more than our loud voices and our shorts and our baseball caps and all of that. And I've always said that no matter what was going on. But of course, some people, they're going to wear it. And so it could be, I can't go. This is not the right time, or it'll upset my family. Even if I could have the money, I don't want them worrying. So we're privileged in Iowa because, relatively speaking, we have low crime compared to big cities. I know here, Iowa City is maybe high crime compared to some of the little towns. But for us, with the amount of crime that we're used to, and then you're talking about going to a major city in another country, it can seem like, oh, it's all too high crime. I have a purse I always carry. Here in Iowa, I would just leave it here and not worry. When I go somewhere else, I'm like, purse, where's this? No, I can't just leave it and think it's going to be okay. So that's street crime. Just what the level of street crime where you're going may be a lot higher, pickpockets, all of that kind of thing, much less if there's some kind of global issue. One of the things that we have to train the students before they go is to the idea of American exceptionalism, where we think we're better than the other countries of the world. They need to first learn about that construct, and then they need to deconstruct it so that when they would go places, they could act more like an equal or someone who can learn from other people. I found I've learned the most when I go to countries, and I'll, if I say I have 5 sons, in every country, fortunately or unfortunately, they value male children more. So when I say I have 5 sons, they're like, oh, this is incredible. And I say, listen, I'd like to learn how you cook this dish that you gave us for dinner, because the women are cooking. And in some countries, the women are not allowed to eat at the dinner table. And you can't come in there and say, no, she eats here in somebody else's house. But if I go to the kitchen and I learn how to cook this dish, and we talk about our families, and my partners would laugh, because in our house, he does the cooking, he is the cook. There's no way I would be asking somebody how to cook a dish. But that's a very important way to be able to talk to women about their lives with their children and learn way more than if I came in and said, I'm Professor Adrienne Wing from the University of Iowa, and I would like to know something about your practices regarding. They look at you like, oh my God, I could come out of that dinner and that cooking session and know a whole bunch of stuff about that family and that culture. So all of our young people need to learn about this exceptionalism, and about the fact that even though you could be a poor person in America, you go abroad and you're rich, and you will be looked at as a rich American. And you might not be ready for that. In my skin tone, when I went to Africa, the people said, I said, I'm a Black American. They said, but you're not Black. And that blew my mind because in America, I'm Black. In South Africa, I'm a so-called colored. In Brazil, I'm white. So you may have an identity and you get in another country and people will configure you and treat you differently based on how they look at you. And so people need to be prepared for that. Other countries could have more racism, sexism, could be illegal to be an LGBTQ person. Other countries don't permit the amount of freedom of speech that we historically have permitted. It's unclear now what's going on. You can't, I tell my students in France, I say, Bill Clinton's a lying adulterer. And I voted for him. I did vote for him. But he is a lying adulterer. Now, in France, you can't, no, you wouldn't be saying the president is a lying adulterer in France, even though they are lying adulterers too. And so you need to learn, what can I say or not say if I'm in a certain country where you could end up in prison? And you may not be given access to your consulate, which has happened in a number of countries. I'm going to come to a conclusion momentarily to give us some time for questions. You see, I think this is all a dream, but it's a dream I've been living here in Iowa that I never thought I would have. I never thought I would recycle this man that I dated in 1980, and he would be here with me for 27 years in Iowa with me and all of these children and grandchildren. So dreams can go beyond any reality that you would think. And part of that can involve your interaction from the time you're a student all the way to a geezer dean like me, interacting with the world. And I was very pleased to see that Iowa is offering some very good scholarships for study abroad. I'm sure it's not enough, but it's not that Iowa is offering nothing. Iowa has some things. And so young people need to learn these resources, because you may be thinking, I can't do something, and that Iowa has resources. Or you may have to do what I did, where you go out and go to the churches and the sororities and different things that your family is affiliated with, or you are, to help get some more resources. I'm sure some of you will be able to create a fund, whether it's in your name. I named a fund in honor of my father at my high school that they gave out for 30 years. So you can name it for anybody, but many of you will have resources that you may be able to give to help young people have these opportunities. In conclusion, we know we are in very difficult times, but I feel hope. Not in my generation. I think boomers, we messed it up. But because of teaching young people, who we want you to have opportunities. We want you to be able to grapple with climate change and things that we messed up. We want you to be able to not only go abroad, but to have the people you interact with abroad come to you and meet your family. Many times that happens. And have, some of them will end up coming to see Iowa City. I told you I have these 19 grandchildren. So far, I've taken 5 of them abroad, because everything comes back to the personal. So I'm not the grandmother that does the diapers. I'm not good at that. But I am the grandmother that uses resources to expose these children to the world, so that they will be able, like their parents, to be part of that world. And so each of you all, I hope in your careers, whether here as a student or in whatever you're going to do with your degrees, will think about the ways that you can contribute, whether it's $5, $10, whether it's a speech, and give opportunities not only to our students and our citizens, but to people from other countries as well, so that we could have share dinner together, go to a movie together, see sports events together, and be in a world that would be full of peace and happiness. Thank you very much.